Booker T. Washington describes meeting an ex-slave from Virginia in his book, Up From Slavery. And he said, I found, in quotes, I found that this man had made a contract with his master 2 or 3 years previous to the Emancipation Proclamation, to the effect that the slave was to be permitted to buy himself by paying so much per year for his body. And while he was paying for himself, he was to be permitted to find labor for whom or wherever he pleased. Well, finding that he could get better wages in Ohio, the slave went there. And when freedom came, he was still in debt to his master, some $300. And notwithstanding the Emancipation Proclamation, which would have freed him from any obligation that he had to his master, this slave, this African-American gentleman, walked the greater portion of the distance between Ohio and Virginia back to his old master's plantation and placed the last dollar with interest in his hands. In talking about this, the man told me that he knew he didn't have to pay his debt, but that he had given his word to his master and he had never broken it. And this is in quotes, he felt that he could not enjoy his freedom until he fulfilled his promise. It's a pretty amazing story. You know, $300 is a lot of money now. You go back to 1865, $300 was an immense amount of money, and he could have simply walked away from it and nobody could have done anything about it. And he chose not to do that because his word was his bond. His word was his word. So with that in mind, we're going to look at Matthew 5, 33 through 37. Again, you've heard it said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord's vows that you have made. But I tell you, there's those words again, but I tell you, this is Jesus, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven or if it's for God's throne or by earth or for its footstool or by Jerusalem or for the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair turn white or black. All you need is to simply say yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Within Judaism, the practice of swearing an oath upon something holy goes all the way back to Abraham, requiring his servant to swear. And in Jesus' days, oaths were given to secure the reliability of a person's word. In an economy where bartering was commonplace, and bartering, everybody knows what bartering is, right? Haggling, going back and forth on a price. Your oath was essential. Your word was essential in commerce exchange of that nature. A transaction bound by an oath was considered unbreakable. And our agreements sometimes aren't quite that, are they? In those days, especially in the days before Jesus, your word was as good as currency. And failing to keep your word was the same as stealing something from the person that you had gave your word to. When our yeses become no or our no's become yeses, are we stealing anything? This is a question. What do y'all think? Are you stealing anything when your yes becomes no or your no becomes yes? What do you think? What are you stealing? Very good. Stealing the other person's trust, aren't you? And probably not only in you, but people like you. Whatever they size you up as, whether that be a Christian or a man, or, we kind of get lumped in together sometimes. So when we steal from trust, we're not only stealing from our own trust, we're probably stealing from the piggy bank of other people's trust. If you're a Christian, when you guarantee something or swear something, when we break that word, We also steal from someone else. Who would that might be? God. God's reputation. When God's people break their word, they steal from God's reputation. God's decisions are unchanging. And if we follow His example, then a yes or a no should be enough. Many Christians have refused to swear official oaths, and often it has cost them considerably not to swear these official oaths. And by all means, if my brother David was here, he would tell you that he believes that you should not swear an oath. And he's got a lot of Bible to stand on to believe that. But if you believe you should not swear an oath, then you certainly should not swear an oath. What does Romans 14:23 say? Sin is sin. If you believe it is wrong and you do it, what is it? It's sin, isn't it? But in my personal opinion, and David and I have talked about this a couple of times, and we've just agreed to disagree on it, as with the rest of this chapter, the Sermon on the Mount, the real thing that Jesus is addressing here is the problem in the heart. A person should resolve in his own heart to always tell the truth. And when he says yes, he means yes. And when he says no, he means no. John 8:44 says Satan is the father of what? Lies or liars, depending on what translation you're reading. I believe Jesus is condemning those who make oaths but never have an intent to keep them. You ever met somebody like that? Maybe made you a promise, gave you a yes, and they never intended to keep that promise or keep that yes. And these things listed above are some of the ways that they did it in this scripture. And most of it involves leaving God's name out. The Pharisees kind of believed, if I make a promise or if I make an oath, but I leave God's name out of it, I can go back on that promise or go back on that oath. And I think Jesus is saying, in all your words and in all your oaths and in all your promises, whether the name of God is mentioned or not, do the best you can to keep it. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Matthew 5:43 through 48. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles, Roger. 2 miles with them. Give the one who asks you. Do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. The law said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It was the Jewish judicial process. Try saying that real quick. And the crux of that, if you want a little light reading, if you want to look at Jewish law and Levitical law, you can look at Exodus 21, Leviticus 24, and Deuteronomy 19. And they'll all tell you an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I think where we've got off base with that, and where they were off base even in Jesus' day, was this was never intended for an individual to carry out his own revenge or his own penalty or his own retaliation. The old law, much like the new law, did not permit personal vengeance. However, the Pharisees of Jesus' time were practicing just that. And it's important to note here that Jesus isn't opposing the law. He's not opposing the law at all. He's opposing the wrong interpretation of this law. That people were using it to get vengeance and retaliation for themselves. According to the law, the injured party was allowed to prosecute, but prosecution was not mandatory. Verse 39 says, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. resist not him that is evil must be understood in the proper context, because there's other places in the Bible, right, where we're told to resist evil. Is that right? James 4:7 comes to mind. Resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. But Jesus is telling us not to return evil for evil, but return evil with good. It's not easy to do, is it? Christianity is a high standard, ain't it? It's a high standard. With that in mind, Jesus says if someone hits you, hit him back. You're supposed to say, no, he didn't say that. You listening? What did Jesus say? Do not hit him back. Matter of fact, not only do not hit him back, if he hits cheek, offer him this cheek. He says we should meekly accept it, is the best way I can put it. And I believe this represents hits of all types. And you may disagree with that, and that's okay. It may be the actual slap to the face, or it may be an insult. Maybe somebody really done you wrong. Maybe somebody's yes ended up being a no, or their no ended up being a yes. I think that's pretty peculiar of these placements in the Sermon on the Mount. They're pretty close together. Jesus says his followers must accept an insult. And accepting an insult sometimes is really hard to do. We shouldn't seek retaliation. And he expects his followers even to do one better than that. And you're thinking, man, Tony, this stuff you've said already is hard enough. How can you have to go one better than that? Well, you read 40 through 42. It's one of the hardest texts in Scripture. If anyone sues you and takes your shirt, hand over your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. Give to the one who asks you. Do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. The coat is talking about an undergarment or tunic that they wore. And the cloak was the outer garment worn over the coat. And the cloak was usually used by the poor as a blanket at night. An illustration that is that if one takes you to court and sues you to get your coat, you should give him your cloak as well. And that's a high standard. It's meaning that even the most unjust treatment is to be endured without revenge. And these aren't my words. These are Christ's words. And if you think I've got it all figured out, you don't know me very well. I'm still working on it. I'm not to this point yet in my walk. What I'm about to say is very hard to say. And 10 or 15 years ago, I wouldn't have said it. 10 or 15 years ago, I didn't even think it. But I'm going to say it now because I do believe it, even though I don't always live it. And you paid me to be the messenger. Sometimes you may regret that you did that. A Christian should think more of his duties than his rights. A Christian should think more of his duties than his rights. And in America in 2021, that's kind of hard to hear. Remember where Jesus is at the time. Palestine is an occupied country. Who's it occupied by? Who is it occupied by? The Romans. And a Roman soldier could compel a Jew to carry his armor for him or carry his luggage, so to say, for him. And it was bitterly resented by the Jews, as you might imagine it would be. The general meaning of compelling someone to render any kind of service just turns the stomach. They could threaten you with bodily harm. They could threaten you by saying, we're going to throw you in jail. Jesus teaches that when a task is laid on one, even if the task is unreasonable and hateful, to do it as it's not unreasonable or hateful. Don't resent it. It's hard to do. Do it as a service gladly rendered to God. And if someone asks you to carry their luggage a mile, carry it 2 miles with a smile. We have basic rights. We do. At least that's the assumption that we operate as human beings, especially here in America. We get angry when those basic rights are compromised. But Jesus, however, he's more concerned that we are redemptive than insisting that we have our rights honored in our situations here on earth. The goal of Jesus is to redeem others through us, not for us to get even with them or them not even necessarily to get what they deserve in this life. Jesus' orientation towards personal rights should not surprise us, by the way. If you think Jesus was all about his rights, I invite you to watch The Passion tonight. Go home and watch that. And then come back next Sunday night and tell me, well, Jesus was all about his rights. I think you're going to find that he was not all about his rights. He left all the rights he had in heaven to come here to redeem us. Listen to Philippians 2, 5 through 11. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ, who, being of the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant and being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. And that name of Jesus, every knee should bow, and in heaven and in earth and under the earth. And every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord. The glory of God the Father. I notice in the Gospels that Jesus staunchly defends the rights of others. Think about the stories in the Bible where 2021 parable, somebody's getting beat up. Somebody's getting sand kicked in their face. Somebody's getting made fun of. Somebody's getting abused. And Jesus steps in and he defends that person, and we can go through example after example after example of that. But Jesus does very little to defend his own rights. Very little. Why? Well, Jesus' primary concern was to redeem and bless all people. Defined for us by Jesus over and over and over again as our neighbor, others, our enemy. Matthew 23:23. Woe, you teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You know, it's another sermon for another time, but I giggle a little bit when people say that giving 10% is not mentioned in the New Testament. Well, there it is. You should practice the latter. What's the latter? The 10%, right? It's another sermon for another time. It just kind of strikes me as odd. What's more concerning tonight is the important matters of the law. What does Jesus say that they are? Well, he says that they are justice and mercy and faithfulness. Justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Not get even, not get ahead, not get revenge. Our goal is to be redemptive in nature, to be there when others' rights are being violated. Jesus is exhorting us to show mercy and love and kindness during times of persecution, during times of trial, rather than fight over something as minute as tunics and cloaks. Because I think that's what sometimes our fights sound like to God. Something minute, a tunic, a cloak, a pillow, a blanket. Although they're used to keep one warm, are they really worth fighting over? I want you to think about the last time you fought about something. And I'm not talking about this. I'm talking, you can tell I've never fought anybody in my life, right? I'm talking about what's the last thing you fought over. It doesn't matter with who, and I don't want anybody to raise their hands and share, unless you'd like to. Was that minute, or was it important? I want you to think about maybe a broken relationship in your life. You know, one of the real interesting things about the Hatfield-McCoy feud is until history started to be written about it, neither side actually knew what started the feud. Something minute, I imagine. I think it was a pig. Folks, we need to quit focusing on the minute and focus on the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Jesus is saying it's better to share with someone than to not share with someone. If someone needs to borrow a tool to accomplish a job, let them borrow it. They may keep it. You know, this is a tough passage. It was a tough passage for me. And I'm going to tell you, going through the Sermon on the Mount, they don't get much easier if you've read ahead. But by showing the more important matters of the law in our life to the people around us, it gives us an open door to be Jesus, to introduce God to someone who may desperately need it. I don't know if there is a better way. You know, there's a lot of books out there about discipleship, and I've read a lot of them. And there's a lot of them that are my favorites about discipleship. But there's nothing better than treating people the way Jesus would treat them. There's nothing better than treating people the way that Jesus said to treat them. If you're looking for your discipleship to get off the launching pad, that's a good start. Treat people like Jesus, and treat people the way that Jesus said to treat them, even when it doesn't make sense. And I'm going to tell you, in America in 2021, if we take that to heart, there's going to be a lot of times that it does not make sense. And people are going to say you're crazy. What about your rights? That's not right. Like I told you, I'm the messenger. And I don't have it all figured out either. But I've got a pretty good idea of what the standard is. I thank God that Jesus came and lived a perfect life, because I'm never going to meet the standard. I'm never going to meet the standard. I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to sit down. Got to watch Greg and I went over and watched the state championship track meet. We had several kids, young people from DeQueen in it. And Lou was pole vaulting. And, they think they start at 8 feet. And most of them clear 8 feet, 8.5. Few don't, but most clear 8.5, 9 feet. More and more of them start going out, 10 feet, 11 feet, 12. There was this one girl, and I believe she was from Valley View. And I don't know if they could have put the bar high enough for her. I think they could have got guys up on top of the bar to hold the bar, and she'd have still got over it. Sometimes I feel like those girls that got out at 8 feet, or 8.5 or 9 feet. I feel like I'm way short of the bar that Jesus set sometimes. But you know what? There's this thing called grace that takes me the rest of the way if I'm living a Spirit-led life. If I'm doing my best and falling short, which I'm going to fall short because I'm about as imperfect a person as God created. So this is not a lesson that I want to get to the end of, and then you beat yourself up because you're not living this to the letter, because I'm going to tell you I ain't either. Not yet. I'm trying to get there. I've come a long way in the last 20 years or so, and I've still got a long way to go, and hopefully another 20 years to get there. But if you're here tonight and you just want to be a better disciple, if you want to look more like a disciple, if you want to be a disciple that looks like the one that Jesus is describing in the Sermon on the Mount, you know how that starts? It starts one decision at a time. You can't go back and redo all those decisions before. I can't go back and redo 56 years of decision making. But you know what? I can do better on the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that, and that's where it starts. I love you guys. If you have a spiritual or physical need, come as we stand and sing.